Welcome to the Brian Heap Creative Writing Podcast series. Dr. Brian Heap is the former head of the Philip Sherlock Center for the Creative Arts at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. In June 2020, Dr. Heap was declared the Caribbean Regional winner of the 2020 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. This marked the beginning of a series of events, which has culminated in this new series of podcasts highlighting the creative writing of young people in Jamaica and the Caribbean. This new series of podcasts, resulting from such an exemplary collaboration between a wide range of stakeholders, has contributed enormously in giving a much-needed voice to our creative young people of Jamaica and the Caribbean. We hope that you will enjoy each of these creative writing podcasts as we post them week by week.
The Dread on Leicester Street.
Gonna lie to the barrier.
The terror began in the spring of '63. There had always been cases of it, but since of late, more and more Rastas were being arrested, trimmed, beaten, and killed. Both boys grew up in the pastoral community of Barabok. Ijamar Bernard, 26, a teacher with puffy black dreads and a delicate smile, and Ezekiel Johnson, 9 years old, a student in Ijamar's class, very quiet and reserved, and who wished his bald head could grow hair as thick as his teacher's. They were neighbors and an unlikely pair of friends. They talked about marble a lot and cricket too. Yet the only part of the friendship which Ezekiel hated was the part which required him to read books Ijamar gave him and to do every single one of his homework assignments. Ezekiel was skipping in front of Ijamar down the community street. They had just come from school and had heard word in town of the altercation. According to eyewitnesses, a police officer wanted to arrest a security guard who happened to be a Rasta. He refused the arrest and a scuffle broke out. The Rasta was shot. The police car was set ablaze. This had been the 11th altercation between the police and a Rasta in St. James, and Ijamar could sense it deep within that in the background of everything, trouble was brewing. "Okay, see you tomorrow. Remember the phonics homework," shouted Ijamar to Ezekiel as he sprinted up his front steps. "I won't forget it," yelled Ezekiel over his shoulder without looking back. When dinner was ready, Ezekiel's mother, Yvonne, who worked as a maid for a very frail Caucasian woman, and his father, Curtis, who was a mechanic, gathered around the table as they usually did for dinner. They lived quite the luxury for people of their background, although, by the measurement of most people who they knew from church, they weren't very well off. The house was falling apart by the hinges and the nails were just not keeping it together. The only thing which seemed to have been keeping it together was their marriage, which survived largely due to the fact that they never let an argument unfold. They prayed and ate in silence. They weren't a talkative set. Occasionally, Curtis broke the silence to tell Yvonne how good the food tasted, and eventually he commented on the Rasta thing, as he called it. Then they all showered, prayed again, then went to bed. When Ezekiel woke at the crack of dawn, it was raining heavily. Wind wafting across the zinc atop his house, a subtle howl sending shudders down his frame. By the time he got ready for school, et and all, the rain had subsided. Like every other morning, Ijamar met him at his porch. This morning, however, he noted that Ezekiel was buried in a sweater, one which was falling off the sides of his body into huge lumps and had the Evangelists of Faith logo, the American missionaries who came to the local Pentecostal church annually, which Ezekiel and his parents attended, embroidered on his left breast. He was about to point out that the sweater was not only oversized, but that it had a faint yellow stain on the right arm, too. But just that second, Curtis appeared from inside the house, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He fiddled with the buckle of his belt, tightening it a bit, and without looking up, he muttered, "I'm sure you heard the news." Murmured Ijamar, his lips twisting in a sort of uneasy way. Curtis finally glanced up, leaning in the frame of the door. "Think you would have trimmed by now, given that you have to, go to work?" Ijamar swallowed nervously and shook his head. "No, I don't think I want to. As a matter of fact, I don't think I could. You don't just get up and subject yourself to oppression." "So cutting off your ear would be oppression?" "Yeah, I'm sure it would be," Ijamar replied without a moment's pause. "Listen, I'm not in the business of telling you what to do, but times are changing, and I figure that as an educated man, you should learn to adapt. Education should not be reasoned on the grounds of assimilation." Curtis chuckled with a slight hint of disbelief. Not only was Ezekiel, who was still there, pinching the strap of his backpack impatiently, lost with the very words that were used, but Curtis was lost too, and he was far too ashamed to admit it. Ijamar didn't understand his motive, however. The vagueness of Curtis's sentiments rubbed him the wrong way, and he was torn between Curtis being for him or against him. "You know what? Just make sure that Ezekiel learns and gets back home safely," muttered Curtis, slowly before a stunned expression crept upon his face and Ijamar turned to see what had caught his eyes. Across the road, Butcher emerged, flexing across the hood of his miniature car to wipe the night's fog off the windshield. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, and who seemed to sweat with every breath he took. Two things struck Ijamar at once. First, Butcher was far too energetic and rowdy for you not to hear him before you actually saw him. And second, his dreads were gone. It was a bad trim, bald patches and stubbles of hair everywhere, as though someone had held him down and sheared the whole thing in a hurry. "Butcher!" blurted Curtis, his voice failing to conceal his fright. Butcher barely turned his head in acknowledgement, motioning a finger in salute. He entered his car, revved it to life, and wheeled out of his driveway, stopping at the gate of the Johnsons. The front window jammed and bobbed until it rolled all the way down, and he leaned over and said, "Morning, boys. Wife, make sure me can go and meet shop today and not get arrested." Ijamar bit his lip, a sudden anger flaring inside him. Ezekiel clenched his teeth and his nose flared. He understood exactly what had happened. He made his way down the steps, glaring up at Ijamar at the landing, and without saying anything, they both knew what the other was thinking. This is wrong. And before you ask, Curtis, yes, wifey trim too. She has skipped work today so she can go a hairdresser go get a quick perm. So pork for dinner Sunday, joked Curtis. Although no one but himself laughed. Butcher gave him a faint smirk and said, "Well, Elijah, you and Ezekiel coming or not? My car don't run on water, and it in one place for too long." Ijamar and Ezekiel exchanged their farewells with Curtis and squeezed into Butcher's rather small car. The car stank of cigar and mud, and the seats felt like dampened wool. As Butcher rounded the corner, Ijamar failed to hold what had been burning inside him. "You shouldn't have done it." Butcher scoffed. "Sacrifice, Ija. Sacrifice. I man have to walk on a road with blades under my foot and not make a sound. You decide to brandish it in them faces? You only give them an opportunity to prove something to the dread. Prove what?" spat Ijamar, edgy and flustered. "Prove that them run things." Ijamar didn't answer. "Yesterday, 6 was arrested in town. 1 get a beating. His hide me and wifey hide in a back room at the meat shop and did not come home till after midnight when streets clear. But why?" sighed Ijamar. "It makes no sense." "Nothing never do make sense in Jamaica. All I know is, them want the dreads out, and them a use ganja being illegal as a scapegoat to wipe we out," yawned Butcher, turning on the street of Hollybrook Primary and stopping at the gate. Ijamar took a deep breath, and he and Ezekiel stepped out to the soft murmur and laughter of children skipping down the corridors. "Be safe, Butcher," shrugged Ijamar, glancing down at the hefty man sandwiched in his own car. "I should be safe," scoffed Butcher. "And me a walk with the target on my head? You be safe. Pray Jah them don't fire you today." Butcher zoomed off, leaving Ijamar with quite a handful of thoughts to gnaw at, especially the one which consisted of him being jobless. He never truly considered it, perhaps on the grounds of him and Principal Lowe being such great acquaintances. But then again, unforeseen times call for unforeseen circumstances. And regardless of them being friends, she couldn't possibly save his post if the board decided to let him go. As he and Ezekiel rushed to class, the second bell hammering through the corridor, the thought of him getting fired grew more and more. He quite loved his job, which was saying something because he never truly enjoyed having to get up so early, but it was the children who'd kept him leveled, and how, if he did a phenomenal job, then he could make a great mark on at least one of their lives, and they'd remember him forever. His classroom was barely full. A few empty chairs, but as expected, with weather like that, as he was sure that somewhere, someone's front yard was undoubtedly flooded and rivers were gushing down the streets of others. He sat his backpack on his desk and moved to the front of the class. Okay, settle down. The class shuffled and eventually went quiet. Margot, an albino girl who usually outperformed everyone in the class, shot her hand up in the air and she spoke before Ijamar's eyes even landed on her. Sir, can I erase yesterday's work from the board? Yeah, go ahead, Miss Peters. So, before we get into today's lessons, I want to talk to you guys a bit, okay? So, anyway, have you guys realized anything strange happening outside of school, like anything which caught your eyes? Yes, sir, said Teddy, firmly. Okay, great. And I taught you guys this word last week, so I hope you guys remember it. So, expound on what strange thing you see happening for me, Teddy. Rolling calf, sir. Last night, I hear the chain. Ijamar laughed, wiping away a stray tear and with a trace of mirth on his face. No, well, yeah, but no. That's not what I hope to hear. I know that many of you don't have access to a radio, but at this time, in Jamaica, the police are arresting people who are Rastafarians. Now, I know that many of you are going to ask why, and I wish I could answer the question, but I don't know either. They're saying it is because weed is illegal and most Rastas use it, so they're trying to get them to stop. I say this to say, some of you may have uncles, aunties, or parents who may be trimming to hide that they're Rastas. But I don't want you to be alarmed or fear becoming a Rasta when you get older. They are just trimming to protect themselves from being arrested. Margot, who had found her seat without Ijamar even realizing, spoke up. Sir, I don't have a radio, but I heard my parents talking about Rastas being killed. The police doing that too? Ijamar paused, bordering between telling the truth or not. Yeah. Wow. Just because they smoke weed? Wow. Well, it's more than weed, Peters. Just know that at this moment, you guys may see some shift in your family or even with your friends here at school, and I don't want you guys to worry. So if you or any of your friends need to talk to someone, you can come to me or Mrs. Welch, the guidance counselor. So, that said, time for math.
Dr. Martin Luther King. Your name will ever ring. Dr. Martin Luther King.
By the time it was lunch, the rain began again. This time, it changed intervals every few minutes, washing the class windows in long streaks of white, as though the sky wanted to split open and cave in on itself, then slowing down to a drizzle and repeating that rhythm till lunch ended. By the time school dismissed, it had died to a light scatter, but neither Ijamar nor Ezekiel had umbrellas, so they had to wait under the arch in the front lot until it stopped completely. When it did eventually stop, they couldn't really tell if it was night or if the clouds were just dreary and overshadowing. They did their usual routine and walked to town. But on their journey there, Ezekiel realized something different. Sir, is it me or is the place extra quiet today? No music, and the last 2 shops we passed closed. Yeah, realized it too. Probably it's just an early night for everyone, given this weather. Ezekiel wanted to stress on it, that deep down he felt that something wasn't right. But he let it go and said instead, remember the 3 marbles I lost the other day? Mm-hmm. Cat had swallowed them. Saw the mess on the back step this morning and it was glistening. Ijamar chortled. Please don't tell me you rummaged through that to get them. Ezekiel forged a gagging sound and made a face of disgust. Good God, no! Great. I'm just going to have to beat Fargo at lunch one day and win back all the ones they want from me, wondered Ezekiel out loud. It will be a salty plate of food in Bubba Hill before you win a game of marble from Fargo. By the looks of it, I can tell that you focus on winning more than you focus on aiming. But winning is the point of the game. Yes, but in everything you do, you have to realize that you've already won. You just have to work hard enough so that everyone else will see that you're the actual winner. Ezekiel rolled his eyes and slung his head back. You always talk like this. Oh, sniggered Ijamar, a tad confused. Like the library books you give me to read. You talk like how they write. Well, I take that as a compliment, so thank you very much. He paused. Something in the distance filling his frame of vision. There was a massive crowd at the landing of the hill. A colossal mess of chaos with people talking more loudly than they should. And crying? He couldn't really tell. What's going on? Asked Ezekiel, barely over a whisper. I don't know, but we have to pass through to get a cabbie. Although, Ijamar squinted at the crowd. It don't look like no cabbies here tonight. Probably we can get a motorbike to drop us at Lane Mouth. Then we walk from there. They made their way down the hill, and with Ezekiel's hand interlocked with his, Ijamar began to weave through the tightly pressed bodies. The outskirts were a bit easier to slither through, but once they got to the middle, people seemed to have literally been glued together. There were pulsing red and blue lights ahead too, and whatever was being shouted was not very clear, until Ijamar almost lost grip of Ezekiel's hand, turned around to grab onto it tighter, and then he heard it. Justice, wickedness, murder. All 3 words overlapping each other. Ijamar mounted Ezekiel on his hip and parted the crowd with his free hand. He miraculously made it to the front, but stopped dead in his tracks when his eyes swam to the ground beyond the dispersed police officers who created a human fence before the scene. Lying flat on their backs, eyes rolled to the back of their heads and saturated in blood and gore, were 3 men. All Rastafarians and visibly dead, the red and blue lights casting from the police car parked beyond them, illuminating their thick and gooey blood, sluggishly channeling to the gutter. No, don't look, hissed Ijamar, using his palm to cover Ezekiel's eyes. He was shocked to the point of the scene planting him in place. He wanted to do something. He felt the urge to shout at the top of his lungs, but no words came. The officers seemed to not have been bothered at all. They had cold expressions on their faces, and their eyes were fixed to the crowd, as though looking for one wrong move to make a 4th body. A hard thud came from behind, sending Ijamar and Ezekiel face first to the pavement. He quickly scrambled to his feet, helping Ezekiel up. In his peripheral vision, he saw who had shoved him out of the way. A woman, no more than 40, her blouse saturated in sweat and mucus, thundering at the police, tears washing her face. "My son didn't do anything! He didn't even have weed!" "Mom, this is a state of emergency. I suggest you step back and let the officers do their work." The woman yelled till her voice broke. Nothing she said was audible. "Ma'am, step back right this moment. You heard the word of the law, lady. The chief said to bring them in, dead or alive. Now step back." Two things happened at once. The woman folded her fist and swung it across one of the officer's face, and without a moment's pause, the officer jostled her so hard she flew backward, slamming her head to the pavement. A man from the crowd leaped before her, wheeling his machete into the arm of the officer who had thrusted her to the ground. The crowd gasped. Ijamar clapped a hand to his mouth. Ezekiel clenched onto the hem of Ijamar's shirt. His mouth hung open. 15 shots blurted through the dense air, and neither Ijamar nor Ezekiel knew if there were a 16th, because the next thing they knew, they were bulldozing through the crowd, Ijamar tugging Ezekiel behind him, going back in the direction from which they came. They sprinted to the market, not once stopping for breath or to see who or what was going on behind them. They ducked beneath the gate, which only had half of the metal fence at the very top, and dodged behind a concrete wall all the way at the back. They knew they were sitting in something wet, but they didn't quite know what it was, and neither were they in any position to care. It was also pitch black and murky, and the sharp scent of rot and waste engulfed their lungs and left an awful taste in their mouths. Ezekiel refused to breathe, stopping his breath for long periods of time and trying as hard as possible not to speak. His little hands were trembling in his lap, not from the cold, but from what he'd seen. His heart was in his throat and threatening to tear through his chest. Ijamar was equally shaken up. His upper body heaved, and his Adam's apple bobbed with every nervous and hard swallow he took. "You're going to reach home safe. I promise." Ijamar turned to Ezekiel, barely making out his silhouette in the dark. Ezekiel wasn't an astronomically smart kid, but he was smart enough to know about comfort words. The moment he'd glimpsed what had happened to the 3 men not too long ago, he'd already made up his mind that their chances of reaching home were slim. Not that he was the target, but that the person who was supposed to keep him safe was. A sudden shuffle at the entrance of the market broke Ezekiel from his train of thought. Rats, Ijamar thought. But then, a slender beam of light broke through the darkness, and they heard 2 men speaking. "The madman sure is in here, the dirty ras run come?" "I don't know, but I want to move up the ranks. So if it even means we only carrying 1 ras tonight, then so be it." "We have to go. Now," whispered Ijamar, who went on his knees and peeped over the edge of the wall. The figure of the 2 men with flashlights were to the far left of the market, kicking through the stalls and boxes in search of him. Bent at the waist and looking back every few seconds, he and Ezekiel narrowly escaped through the side exit and were back out into the thick, cold air. They tiptoed in the shades of the trees, disappearing behind every trunk until Ijamar stopped behind one, cascaded in a dark shadow. He stooped down to Ezekiel's level and whispered, "Okay, we have to make it home tonight. The walking is going to be long, but we have to do it. We can't go back down the main street, too many police. We have to take Leicester Street. They probably won't be there, and it has more trees to hide behind, if anything. At the end of Leicester Street, then we can just take the shortcut and go home. If we reach the shortcut, we'll be fine." Ezekiel nodded, bit his quivering lip, and stared at Ijamar's dreadlocks flowing over his shoulders. Ijamar noticed this almost immediately, took a deep breath, then an idea hit him in the spur of the moment. "Give me a sweater." Without question, Ezekiel shimmied out of it and handed it to him. He threw it atop his head, the water from the market which Ezekiel was sitting in, dripping through the crevices of his hair, and yanked the sleeves across one another, creating the illusion of it being a hijab. "Ready?" he asked before Ezekiel nodded. With this newfound confidence, they went all the way back, walked in front of the market, then rounded the corner and, in the sidewalk, hustled down Leicester Street. They were almost to the end when Ijamar saw something moving in the shadows a long stretch before him. He shoved Ezekiel to the wall, their backs pressing against the hard surface, burying themselves even more in the shadows of a stop sign. The silhouettes of two people were made clear as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. "They won't see. You're wearing the sweater on your head, remember?" whispered Ezekiel's weak voice beside him. He folded his lips and took a deep breath, calculating in his head the risk of walking by. At long last, he decided to just do it. The longer they waited, the more risks they were prone to. Still in the shade of the shadow, they continued their journey. The closer they got to whoever it was, the more the lump at the back of Ijamar's throat grew. Eyes on the ground and his breath seized, they passed to the giggles and murmurs of two women. He sighed with relief. They were only footsteps away from the end of the street and where they would break into the shortcut and didn't have to hide, when suddenly they heard booming voices behind them.
"Ladies of the night, you know this is a state of emergency. Go home. Now."
A voice with such authority only meant one thing. Ijamar and Ezekiel sped up, almost breaking into a run. Their hearts were,
"You there, you two, stop right there,"
barked a voice behind them. Ijamar cussed under his breath. He lulled to a stop, defeated, knowing too well that if they had run, the officers would open fire.
"Turn around, hands in the air and step into the streetlight."
Ezekiel began to cry, without sound, and Ijamar was not too short from tears either, as the sweat from his forehead stung his eyes and clouded his vision.
"Name and occupation?"
asked one of the two officers as the boys wandered into the streetlight. He is Ezekiel Johnson and I am William Buckner," said Ijamar, his voice hoarse, lying about his name because he knew that his real name would be a clear giveaway. I am his teacher. I teach at Holybrook Primary. We were coming from school when we were caught in the crowd and couldn't get a cab. We are neighbors."
"Is that so?
asked one of the officers.
Is that true, little man?
Yes, sir, murmured Ezekiel with a feather-like voice.
All right. Quick search and you should be on your way then,
said the officer, advancing toward them. He patted down Ezekiel, rummaged through his backpack, then moved on to Ijamar. He unzipped Ijamar's backpack and fished through book by book before he rested it on the ground and said,
legs apart.
He tapped from his ankle, come all the way up to his inner thighs. Ijamar's heart a deafening thud.
Okay. You boys seem to be clean. You can be on your... What's that thing on your head?
At that split second, the officer yanked at it, revealing Ijamar's thick strands of cotton-like dreads. You think you're smart, eh? Chuckled the officer in disbelief. This boy think him smart, he repeated to the other officer.
I knew something was wrong. I just didn't wait on you to realize it too. On your knees,
bellowed the officer who had been waiting. Ijamar couldn't control his tears now. Please, I'm begging. I'm a teacher. I don't even smoke weed, but I was born a Rasta. Please.
On your knees, with your hands on your head. No!
Please, I swear to you. I'm law-abiding. I never do anything wrong. The sound of an old motor sliced through the air, and looking up, Ijamar saw a familiar small car creeping down the street. He was deaf to whatever the officers were saying now. He staggered quickly into the road, the car stopping at his knees. Butcher, please, take Ezekiel home, please. He sobbed, thumping Butcher's window desperately as it slowly rolled down.
Excuse me, what is going on here?
Asked the officer, stepping to the side of Butcher's car.
I am Darian Fitzgerald, officer,
said Butcher.
Do you know this man?
Asked the officer sternly, the tension escalating. After a long pause,
yes.
Neighbor.
And this little boy?
Yeah. Neighbor. Same church too.
Who are his parents? And why is he going home with that teacher? And a Rasta at that?
Curtis and Ivan Johnson, sir.
We are neighbor. And he teach him, so it makes it easier for them to just travel home together.
Ah, nodded the officer. I see.
Okay. So here what you do. Carry this little boy home. We'll deal with the rest.
Butcher's eyes swelled with tears. Officer, please. Him is a good man. Him teacher.
Sir, shut up before I charge you for disobeying an officer. You, little boy, hop in the car now. And don't run into the law again.
Ezekiel took up his backpack from the ground, gave Ijamar a quick hug around the waist, and murmured to him, Don't worry. I'll make sure Mommy comes down to school tomorrow and get Principal Lowe to come bail you out. Ijamar gave him a reassuring nod before he entered the car and said, Okay. Later. Butcher wheeled away, and Ezekiel sat up in the back seat, gazing through the frosted rear window. He smeared away the dew with his hand, and his eyes were fixed on Ijamar, who was now on his knees, staring down the barrel of a gun.
just heard The Dread on Leicester Street, written by Delano Frankson and read by Darian Reid, a Philip Sherlock Center for the Creative Arts production, sponsored by Chase Fund.